Let's begin with a thought experiment. Match the adjectives with the pictures: terrorist, peace loving, genius, and rich. Pause the video and do this thought experiment. Now let's check how you did, and let's begin with the last picture. Born Nsekai Sway David Jr. Nakobo in 1997, Nasty C is one of the richest celebrities in South Africa. He became famous after the release of his song Wade. So he's a rich guy here, and he is a rapper. The third picture, Mariam Mirza Khani is the only woman to have received the Fields Medal Prize in Math. She was an Iranian mathematician and a professor of mathematics at Stanford University. The second picture, peace loving, Harmeet Singh, a Sikh, has written a message to those who confuse Sikh and Muslims, keeping in mind the rising levels of hate crime towards Sikhs in the United States. Well, he's not even a Muslim, as many white supremacists seem to think. And now the first one, terrorist. Wade Michael Page fatally shot six Sikhs and wounded four others in their temple in Wisconsin in the United States, mistaking them for Muslims. He was a white supremacist. So how did you do in this thought experiment? Hello and welcome to English for a World Full of Compassion. In this video, I want to dig deeper into the origins of stereotypes and specifically into the power structures that have given rise to them in the first place. Stereotypes. What images spring to mind when you see the pictures above? What comes to mind when you hear the word Arabs? What images does Africa conjure up? What adjectives are often associated with women? And what comes to mind when you think of white people and black people? Now reflect on your own stereotypes. Do you ever stereotype others? Have you ever met someone who fit the stereotype you had in mind? Have you ever challenged stereotypes? Have you ever been the victim of stereotypes? Do you ever make ethnic jokes? Reflect on these questions. Now let's ask a few people about why we stereotype others. So Ahmed, we stereotype people when we assume that a person who happens to fall into a certain category will have certain personality traits. Examples: blonde people are stupid, black people are good at sports, all Russians drink vodka, white people can't dance. Well guys, do you do this? Do you pigeonhole people into certain categories? So let's ask Patrick, why do people stereotype others? Stereotypes are found in every situation characterized by uneven power relations. In such a situation, the powerful determines the norms, and whoever doesn't fit the norm is stereotyped negatively. It's universal. Well, I actually agree with this one. So Laura, why do people stereotype others? The thing is that people tend to accept their behavior as normal, meaning as a norm or as most people do. But alas, this is usually farthest from the truth. But this kind of attitude comes with a sense that whatever it is that others do that deviates from their behavior is not normal and should be either corrected or pointed out as deviant. What about you guys? Whose views do you agree with and whose views do you disagree with? Share your thoughts with us. Now let's listen to three people discussing their views about stereotypes. Take a look at the pictures, stereotypes in the media. I think that one is all too familiar. Dominant class, again, all too familiar. Human interaction and diversity of Asians. Well, listen carefully and then answer the question about what they are mainly discussing. Mehran, something strange happened to me the other day. I was having lunch at a restaurant when an American tourist struck up a conversation with me, but the moment he found out I'm from Iran, he got up and left. Even though he doesn't know me, he made an unfair judgment about me. David, sorry to hear that. I guess he thought you were terrorists, despite the fact that not a single Iranian has been caught in a so-called terrorist act. Also, Americans tend to accept as true whatever the corporate dominated media tells them without trying to investigate. Aki, I have been there. It's really sad and unfair when others treat us based on hearsay and preconceptions. It's even more unfortunate that stereotypes are everywhere. For instance, although Asians are very diverse, most Westerners and Americans put us in one category. Mehran, this raises the question of why people stereotype others. David, lumping people together is convenient because you don't need to make any effort to understand them on their own terms. As Aki pointed out, most people have a predefined image of others, and it makes little difference whether you fit that category or not. So, in a psychological sense, stereotypes help mentally lazy and uncritical people to interact with others. Aki, I think stereotypes have political and economic origin in the first place. For instance, the dominated classes everywhere in the world are labeled with negative images, while the dominant are labeled with positive ones. Mehran, that's definitely true. Compare the stereotypes about Arabs and other third world countries with stereotypes about Americans and Westerners, and you will see how politics influences and strengthens the formation of false images about others. David, I believe it's more humane to interact with other people on a case by case basis, in spite of the fact that it requires some efforts. Food for thought. Let's check out some quotes and think about them. First one, what is truth? Attempting to get at truth means rejecting stereotypes and cliches. Yes, and that makes a lot of sense because if you keep looking at the world through the lens of your stereotypes, you'll not get anywhere. Now, let's look at the second one. Stereotypes help keep the oppressed in line. Absolutely. And the way it works is like this: you have this uneven power structure everywhere in the world now, and the dominant in this power structure set the norms, while the dominated internalize these norms. So once the dominated internalizes stereotypes about them, that's how they perpetuate this uneven power structure. The third code, it's hard to fight an enemy who has outposts in your head. Well, you have to begin here, right? Look at the stereotypes about women. It's an old one, but still relevant. Now let's look at the last one. We define the world first, then we see it. Actually, we don't define it. It's defined or predefined for us, and then we see it. And the way it is predefined for us influences what we see, and that's a problem. So in this sense, you can only be black in America because it's an experience that is determined by the position of the black people in this uneven power structure as dominated. Discussion corner. Let's read some statements and take a position. Some stereotypes are true. Well, actually, no, I disagree with this because some stereotypes are not always true. They might be true in some contexts, not maybe incorrect in other contexts. People stereotype others just for fun. No, they don't. Just look at the stereotypes surrounding the dominant classes, rich, white, male, vis-a-vis the dominated classes, non-white, poor, and female. Stereotypes are cruel. They are, because they rob the other person of their total humanity. You just, put them into categories. The dominant groups have positive stereotypes, almost always. Stereotypes are harmless. They are not. They actually maintain certain power structure. They reproduce it. We will always have stereotypes. Well, it depends on this power structure. So if you look at black and women as examples of oppressed groups, the stereotypes about them have changed. So depending on the gap. Well, what do you think, guys? Share your thoughts with us. Now on to our thought stimulating talk about why we stereotype others. First, look at the questions. What do you see in these pictures? What's the link between stereotypes and discrimination? How do stereotypes keep the oppressed down? What's the link between the last picture and stereotypes? What can be done to reverse the effects of stereotypes? So take a good look at the pictures, listen to find answers to the questions. Stereotype is defined as a generalization about a group of people where a certain set of characteristics is associated with them based on their appearance, race, gender, nationality, as well as our preconceptions. Stereotypes arise from our inability to gain sufficient information to make a fair judgment about people or situations. When such information isn't on hand, we tend to stereotype to fill in the missing pieces of information. Such generalizations come from experiences we have had ourselves, read in books or magazines, seen in movies or television, or told to us by friends or family. When people judge others based on prejudices and stereotypes and treat them differently, they discriminate against them based on no fact. This discrimination can take many forms. We may create subtle or overt pressures which will discourage persons of certain minority groups from living in a neighborhood. Women and minorities have been victimized by discrimination in employment, education, and social services. We may shy away from people with a history of mental illness because we are afraid they may harm us. What can be done to deal with negative stereotypes? The key to reversing negative stereotypes is to contradict them in direct interactions between people in the media and through education. Once people get to know a person from the other side, they will often find out that they are not as bad as they originally had assumed. The media also plays an important role in reproducing or breaking down these stereotypes. So, if a movie or the motion picture industry in general characterizes a group of people negatively, they will reinforce negative images and make conflict worse. They can play a significant role in building mutual understanding. Likewise, education can create and reinforce negative stereotypes in its curriculum. However, the fundamental causes of stereotypes must be addressed in order to break them down. In other words, at bottom, stereotypes reveal economic and social inequality that can be traced back to a historical origin with connection to the present. For instance, it's not a coincidence that women and slaves have had almost similar historical trajectory in the sense that both have been exploited and oppressed by dominant groups. As a result, both have been stereotyped negatively to justify their oppression and to keep them down. Stereotypes can be very effective in making the oppressed complicit in their own oppression. This is often achieved by making marginalized and dominated groups internalize the false images about them and making them accept the standards set by the dominant groups as the norm. Well, this is the end of our lesson on stereotypes and time for questions. Questions for reflection. What have you learned from this video? Have you learned anything about your own stereotypes? What are the origins of a stereotype? Why are some groups stereotyped positively while others are stereotyped negatively? What do stereotypes tell us about the current world? Let me end with a quote from the amazing Nigerian writer Chimamanda. Power is the ability not just to tell the story of another person, but to make it the definitive story of that person. So let's challenge these assumptions about others, these notions, these predefined notions of the other, because they often maintain and reproduce these oppressive power structures. See you next week.